Yeah, go ahead and start the intro, and then I'll just build on and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so we've got Frank here, who is representing the facilities naming committee that Dan and I co-chaired, and it was a pretty good representative group of like students and parents and community members and staff members, and I found it a very productive group and had some really good discussions. And so I know the board was kind of like on the fence in terms of like, do we actually need a naming policy? Kind of where are we at in terms of that? So going out and talking to people in the community about what, if we were going to have a naming policy, what it would consist of was helpful for me, kind of clarify some of my ideas about it. And Dan, I don't know if you want to say anything to introduce before we hear from Frank.
No, not much other than there's maybe 20, 25 people, I would guess, in terms of like that were that attended the committee meetings, and it was like, well, I guess I would deal with letter from Frank in terms of like the origins of the policy and sort of how it came into being, but it was a good process.
Yeah, thank you. I'm doing Frank.
Yeah, well, thank you. For a little bit of background, I think most of the people in the room know the background, but for the public record, maybe 6 months ago, there was a group that approached the school board about renaming the gymnasium at the high school Pebble Court. And I was part of that group, but I was also part of it saying, I don't know how they would do this without having a naming policy, because if not for a naming policy, then the next loudest voice in the room, the next loudest voice in the room will carry the day or not. And that's not any way to kind of run a program like that. Fortunately, the board said, let's set up a policy committee. So it was actually a pretty easy lift because we got great support from the school district, but we also saw that almost every other school district in King County had a naming policy already, and they were remarkably similar. So if you go to the next slide, these are the 19 school districts in King County. 16 of the 19 have a naming policy. I'd say if you look at the word count, 92%, 95% is remarkably identical. The 3 that don't are Mercer Island, but we know where that one is. And then Riverview, which is the upper left, and Skykomish, which is the upper right. And Skykomish is a school district that looks quite large, but it's got 40 students and 2 schools. 40. It's a school district. So it's sort of understanding that they don't have a naming policy just yet. But in any event, so we kind of leveraged that and then went ahead and kind of did our work. And we didn't actually have a stated charter, but I think after the first meeting with Dr. Rundle and Maggie Ty and Dan, it became clear that there were kind of a couple of different parameters established. One was we needed to consider the interest of the community and the school district, both. And so as we were having our dialogue, we said, well, this is probably good for the school district, but does the community really want it, or does the community want it and the school district doesn't want to do it? So, but we had to consider both. The second was we were just chartered with drafting a policy. We weren't chartered with naming people or nominating people or anything like that. And that was, I think, liberating, because we could say, we didn't talk much about individuals during the process. It was a coach, educator, an administrative person, somebody, a bus driver. We talked about janitorial people, like what if one of these things happened? And we kind of ran all the policies through that filter of, would this apply broadly to somebody who might be nominated? And then the third, I think the general feeling amongst the committee was we're happy to support the school district in whatever way possible. We don't fancy ourselves as being the group that will receive nominations and do that work. That's separate. Our goal is to come up with a policy. So I won't go through all the policy members, the policy development committee members, but Maggie, Ty, and Dan were important to have their voice and say, hey, the board's going to want to know about this and those sort of things. Chick Hodge, a former school board member who's in his mid-80s and has been on the island for 60 years, was kind of one of our sage wisdom people. Kimberly Frank, who's the PTA director from the high school. And then Terry Mormon, who's part of the she's co-president of the Historical Society, and she was 22 years the executive director for the Chamber of Commerce. So that was a good nucleus of kind of wisdom. But we had lots of great contributions from other community members and coaches and students, and so this is sort of a presentation of what the group came up with. This first session was requirements brainstorming, and we started with a blank slate. You know, what if we were to have a naming policy? What would be some of the considerations? What would be some of the concerns? What would be some of the benefits? What would be the drawbacks? And we broke into 4 or 5 different groups of 4 people each, and pretty much selected at random, because whoever you were sitting next to, you joined up with them. And after that, we said, well, let's kind of try to come up with a first version of whatever a policy might look like. And since a lot of the policies were remarkably similar, it was, that part of it was relatively easy. So there was researching, and the school district staff came up with, I think they have posted something like 20 different policies from different school districts. I can't promise that every one of the committee members read every one of the policies, but I think they definitely read them. And then we kind of did a version 1.0 of the draft, and at the second meeting we did kind of a, here's version 1.0, and here's some of the things that are worthy of discussing kind of on the margin. And so not all policies were alike, but the brainstorming session sort of influenced what we might want to talk about and make special for Mercer Island School District, or might want to prioritize, or whatever. So we went through, we had 3 face-to-face meetings, or 2 face-to-face meetings, 1 virtual meeting, and then a lot of dialogue in between the group over the last, say, 3 months. So what was it, 2-3 weeks ago, we came up with a near final version. At that meeting, we said, we started changing words like will to shall, and that stuff. So really important stuff, but we kind of knew we're kind of done with the discussing kind of the major differences that might be in the policy. So I'm gonna, this is possibly the most important slide, because this talks about what we did on what we talked about on the margin and what we really wanted to be sure was in there. So hopefully everybody has a draft. It was provided as part of the pre-reading, but one key element was this needs to be something special. We need to set the bar high. And so sections 3 and 4, sections 3 is general principles and section 4 is naming criteria, was our attempt to establish a high bar. And I'll call out, I mean, it would take a truly exceptional person to meet all these things. But then we said, we want somebody who has served the district at least 25 years, which is a very high bar. And then they need to have been gone from the district by at least 5 years. And if they went to another district after that, the clock starts ticking after they left that district or the next district or whatever. So we wanted kind of to to allow for taking the emotion out of, oh, hey, here was this great person who did this great things over 10 years and they're getting ready to retire, or heaven forbid something bad happened to them, and they were no longer with us. You know, let's not immediately go forth and put this person's name in a nomination for something naming. We need the passage of time. So the starting point was 25 years or more, and 5 years after that 25 years or more.
Is that written into the policy?
It is. So
Where-
if you go to sections 3 and 4,
Got it. Okay.
so section 3, item 4 is greater than 25 years, the last statement. And then section 4 is item 6, eligibility. No one shall be eligible for naming until at least 5 years after their separation from the district or their retirement, whichever comes later. So that's where those two are.
Thank you.
And I'm not suggesting these words are perfect, but that was our intent. The second was that community input would be important throughout this. So nominations could come from anybody in the community. There'd be a group of people who would, this naming policy review committee would review it. They would then put forth the names of the people who passed the first filter for community input, and that community input could come through emails, it could come through webinars, it could come through face-to-face meetings. We didn't try to be prescriptive about how that would happen, but there needed to be a process by which community members could publicly or anonymously state their in favor or their objections. And then in terms of then the committee would take that feedback, and whoever that committee is, and consider that feedback and make 1 or 2 or 0 proposals to the school board to consider. And so we said max in any 1 year would be 2, but in most years it would be 1 or 0. And so that was then left up to the school board to say, we say, you know, let's do that person, or let's move forward with considering that person. We also wanted minimal effort for the administration and school board. So we said, we're going to do this max 1 time a year. Actually, we said we'll do it 1 time a year. And then we also said, we're not going to consider an unlimited number of nominations. We're probably just looking at 0, 1, or 2. We also said no cost to the district. So, and you know, that meant that no cost to the district today and no cost to the district to maintain whatever the naming was. So if you want to put in a bench or put a name on an athletic facility or a name on a classroom, that was at the cost of whoever the nominating group was. And then out clauses and flexibility is, I think, the beauty of good policies like this. There's sections 9 and 10 have some out clauses that say, well, if so 2 circumstances to highlight. One is if the school district doesn't want to have the building or bench or plaque named anymore, they can change their mind. And if the honoree doesn't want to be associated with the building, school, or plaque, they can change their mind. So it's not a forever thing. The other thing is the policy says these are flexible policy guidelines, but the board can reserve the right to say, no, that person did something truly extraordinary. And the example I used was this proposed policy is remarkably similar to the Seattle School District. You probably remember, some of you will remember the John Stanford years at the Seattle School District. This policy was in place then. John Stanford oversaw the mandatory busing transition to magnet schools, did it over a 3-year time period, and tragically died of leukemia. And they said, you know, we're going to make an exception for this guy because he really moved us to a different place. And I think they named the admin building after one of the elementary schools after. So that's possible under this, but it's sort of, you know, I would hope that the spirit of everything else carries the day as opposed to the hard and fast rules. All right. So that's the end of kind of my prepared remarks. I'm happy to, if people have questions around what did you guys talk about this, or how do you feel about that? But that's kind of 15,000-foot view.
First off, thanks to you and the committee for a lot of work that went into this whole process. I think it's, you know, very impressive. I wonder, what's the procedure if for getting feedback from the community? Like if someone is offered up as a name, and then there might be like other people in the community who are like, no.
Well, so if, and there's the last 2 pages of this PowerPoint are a process draft we put through, and this is, most of the policy, none of the policy statements I saw went too deeply into what the process was. So we can sort of make that up and adapt it to whatever we want. But I think the feeling was, and an open call for nominations that might be a 30-day time period. And then those nominations go to whichever committee is designed to review these. That committee says, oh, there's 4 nominations, but we only want to put forth 2 of them to the community. I think they're probably going to be rather liberal in terms of what they want to put forth to the community and allow feedback. But they have the latitude to say, no, this one probably won't make it, so let's not ask the community for feedback. Then in terms of how the feedback comes in, I sort of defer to you on how you get feedback from the community. It'd be nice if it was enabled both public and private anonymous feedback. It'd be nice if it wasn't toxic, you know, because you don't want to see people, you know, we all have different opinions about various people, and you'd like it to not turn into something negative. That, of course, could happen. But then the committee would come back together and review the feedback that they got anonymously, publicly, in online forums and emails and whatnot, and letters of recommendation. And they say, all right, let's take a look at these. And then they say, all right, we as a group want to put forth these 1 or 2 or 3 or 0 people to the school board for them to discuss. So that's the framework.
Oh, sorry.
I'll get director.
Yeah.
I have several questions, so however you want to do it is fine. But what was there discussion of the parameters of the naming? So first of all, thank you for all your work. All of you guys who participated. I think it's pretty clear. I think the policy is really important. I've been a bit reluctant. I'm just personally not a fan of people's names all over community spaces. That's just my personal, not about any particular person. So that in general, that, you know, but that's my personal view. If the community supports it, by all means. And I think as far as policies go, I think this is the work that's been done on this is really good. So the questions I have are parameters of recognition, meaning signs, size, locations. Like, to me, there's a big difference between there being like a small plaque outside a classroom or inside a classroom versus like someone's name on top of the commons. And was there, I don't see anything in the policy that kind of dictates that. I would love to see some parameters, if the community supports it, about the intention of what this means. Like, benches are great with a little plaque, or, you know, I mean, as far as my personal comfort level, but so that's one of my questions. If was there any discussion on that?
Was,
And
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so we discussed, well, does the committee recommend a name to the board? And then it's up to, but no precision around what the manner of recognition is. Is it a statue or is it a plaque? The two ends of the spectrum, perhaps. And the group says, no, we should probably have the nominating group say, you know, here's our preferred 1 or 2 or 3 ways we'd like to have this person recognized. And the group would say to the board, we kind of like most of those or 2 of those, but then it's up to the school board to say, you know, no, we're not going to do a 30-foot statue of something. We are going to, could we negotiate with you for something that's, you know, slightly more, and so that's, of course, a little bit, that's work, probably, but I think, yeah, so we did talk about it. And so where we ended up with is that the nominating committee would both recommend a person and 1 or more alternatives on how they would be recognized. And then it's, again, still up to the board to say, no, we don't like one of the, we like that person, but not one of the 2 ways you want to recognize them.
Got it.
That's
And we didn't, just to clarify, we did not have anyone from facilities and maintenance and operations on the committee. And so in terms of that, you know, they haven't necessarily, and I'm sure they would have insights into, you know, if something could even be done.
Right.
So
I would like to see more discussion of that. I think having it open-ended is scary, and leads to, like, if everyone has like a similar understanding, and maybe it's a wide parameter, but I think they're like, I mean, I think there should, I would like to see, that would make me a whole lot more comfortable with the naming policy, is to see some type of parameter. You know, some people are fine with like a legacy wall that's in one place, that isn't like screaming from everywhere. Some people want like something giant to recognize. The part of the concern that I have also is cost, and then therefore equity. If the cost is on the people nominating and they don't have the same funds that other groups might have, is their nominee more important and is it more likely to happen? I agree with it not falling on the district. But I'm just wondering if there should be some sort of like a scholarship fund for this type of thing. So that's, I just see that as a huge inequity. If there's a group of like, the bigger the group, I love the intention of 25-year veteran. I would actually widen it to something like 25 years in education, because not everyone is, you know, 25 years on Mercer Island is a long time. And I appreciate the intention of that. And I don't know what the right answer is. I mean, that's like 6 people, which maybe that was the intention. And then that's, you know, that's cool. I would just love to hear kind of more about that thought process. And the final thing that I have questions about is the community input in terms of what, I think a naming policy is important because of the reasons you said, but does the community support putting names of people on things that are community spaces? And just that general question first. I think this is a great place to start. I just want to get more, I want to hear more feedback from the community as a whole. Obviously, the people that volunteer for this committee are pro naming things. I mean, I would assume that when you're interested in something, you're going to volunteer to participate. And I just want to make sure that it's the community interest in terms of actually naming. So those are just kind of my questions, concerns?
So um, my thoughts on at least your last point are that, this time it was a coach that was put forth. There will be others later. And so to me, this policy is mostly for the board to provide some guidance to the community as opposed to the community saying, do we need a policy or not? At least that's my layperson's point of view. And then if the community says, hey, this person was nominated, but we don't believe it, we have a higher standard than this policy, and so we're gonna push back on that. Great, but I don't think, if it were me, and I was a board or the future board, I would love the fact that there's a policy that provides some amount of guardrails so that it's not the loudest voice in the room the next time, and the next time, and the next time.
Totally agree.
Who was first? Oh, sorry. I was okay. I'm looking at like the second point on the naming criteria thing with the geographic or historical significance. Does that mean that we would name buildings not just after people who work for the district, but like students or people who like historical figures?
Great question. And so there was some desire to allow for a little bit of wiggle room for historical figures. And I think some discussed Indian tribes, that discussion came up. But most of this part was, again, almost verbatim on what other school districts have done. I would also say there was like almost no support for renaming elementary schools or renaming Islander Middle School or the high school. It was mostly about wings of buildings, classrooms, athletic fields, blah, blah, blah. So, or putting something out in front of the building. The Indian tribe example was one that, we're on the lands of the Duwamish tribe. And so we kind of talked about, that, but, yeah, it definitely contemplated that it might not be somebody who worked for the school district.
So I have there are a few questions, but I would love to hear the others. First, related to parameters, I think that I would like to see the parameters in the partial of, like this gym, like a partial portion of the building integrated there, so it's clear that it is maybe only one portion and not the whole high school or something like that. So that it's the other question is I am on the opposite end of you. I think that I was going to ask, why did you get to the 25 years mark? I understand that it has to be like, but I would love to hear a little more.
I don't think there's any science to that. So if somebody said, no, it should be 15 years or 20 years, we just wanted it to be a high bar. And
I totally get it. I am seeing it in the perspective of that you're mentioning that at the beginning that it has to be one of the values is about diversity. And when you put all this criteria, you put all the names, like the people that you will be eligible will be white community members just because of the demographic of Marcel and through the years. So I think that also the students, the diverse students that we have, do not see the sense reflected in the communities. So that is kind of my only challenge, how to balance that, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that have contributed a lot, but maybe it's not, maybe have been 50 years or something like that. But my other question, I know that there's other districts that they wait until the person is deceased to nominate them, and I'm curious if there was discussion about that and why was this one?
there was, I think, there were some people who felt, well, that's sort of morbid that we would wait until somebody dies before we would recognize them. If they served the district for 25 years in a distinguished way, had been gone for 5 years, why not, recognize them then? even though the emotion's out of the room from their recent retirement. But there definitely are school districts that say you have to be dead before you can be recognized.
And for me, I think that is also within the parameters that if that is the case, it says that the bishop will review periodically, just because people change. And so pretty much a guidance that like around how much time every so often, when are you going to review it, right? Because, I think that was important for me, and I will let them go because I just have more questions, but I have to see what.
Yeah, first on the duration, my understanding was actually a little bit different from the language, that it was about the duration of the period in which the plaque or the statute would be in place.
That was my understanding.
Would be 25 years rather than 25 years of service. I mean, so the understanding it's not everywhere. And part of that was looking at like the park benches, for instance, in the city. I think that's 15 years or 20 years, and sort of looking at something that's not permanent, but sort of acknowledges that there might be things change. And then two, like I guess to your question, Deborah, on equity, it's something that, like, that was discussed. And so I think the thought was at a high level that naming wouldn't be attached to any amount of funding because certain groups might have deeper pockets than others, and that doesn't necessarily reflect the legacy or the contribution. But then once, if an individual is selected, it could be an opportunity or a catalyst for those people who wanted to make a contribution. And then that could in some way shape what the tribute is. So everyone, it wouldn't be a barrier to entry, but then if it becomes like band boosters or basketball boosters say, hey, this is great, we want to, contribute a lot of money for, both honoring and then, improving the facilities, to not make that a limiting factor.
Did the committee look at all about the other districts in the area that have naming policies? Did we look at all about what percentage of things are named?
No, not specifically. Anecdotally, I can tell you that athletic fields tend to, get the most recognition. Some of the performing arts places like Quincy Jones at Garfield, it's quite well known in terms of its recognition. We didn't talk, recognizing the individual teacher you thought, oh wow, how do we do that? I think what they do at the community center is actually kind of cool. They have a little plaque outside of some of the rooms, and they have the room number, and then they have a name of a whole Mercer Island family there. So it's the Clark room, or the whatever. So maybe that model could work for teachers, because we've been, so many outstanding teachers at Mercer Island. And many of them have created programs that still last today, well past them being gone. But no, there wasn't any, we didn't try to be too prescriptive about that.
I'm a little nervous about walking down the Frank Scott hallway to get to the Fred Rundle Auditorium and sit in the magnetized seat. It's.
I'd be worried about walking down the Frank Scott hallway.
I don't want to see the Riot Games cafeteria brought to you, it just seems.
Well, I would say that almost universally people said that we need to recognize people for the right reasons and that these things can't be bought. And so, okay, maybe somebody writes a check for $5 million and then you say, okay, let's remodel. We'll talk again. But generally it wasn't who brings the most. It was not going to be who brings the most money to the table. And it was, a decision by the board that we're willing to recognize your honoree, your nominee in this way. And if you want to go raise money for it, great. If you can't, okay, that's also okay.
I just want to chime in before we do another round of questions. So, a few things. One is I had the same understanding as Dan that 25-year thing
And
is
now I look at the words.
It's
and I
actually,
got it
yeah,
all.
in the context, sort of like, just be aware that we'd be stuck with this name for 25 years. So if we were going to specify an amount of time, I think something like 15 years would be great because it would really open up the possibility of honoring more different types of, former staff members and so forth. So that's one thing. I think it would be really good to put in the text if the will of the board is to not even consider renaming elementary schools, middle school, high school, especially since we have kind of a geographic thing going on for the most part, it makes a lot of sense to keep with that. So you can't really just like name one elementary school after a person and then the others are all geographic.
Is that not written anywhere? I remember with Northwood, that was kind of clear that it was gonna be like geographically named.
That was parameters the board put around that particular process. In the absence of a policy, they came up with an ad hoc.
Yeah, I just
That's
remember
it,
that
that's it.
existed at
Yeah.
the time, and I am,
So I would love to see that actually added into this policy. If we're adopting this policy, and then, I can't read my own. It's like, I can't read. Let me know, it's not these readers. No, it's not that, it's like. I don't know. I feel quite confident that it is the right thing to do to have a naming policy, just like for all the reasons that I said, gave, that Deborah gave, that it's important to have first of all, like everyone else's policy, and there must be a reason for that, but it's important to have guidelines so that it doesn't just become a free-for-all of the loudest voices in the world. I think that's how that's gone, and I think that it's actually a net positive if it's something that we're laying out that people can do in the future to honor, the amazing educators and others that we have in this district, right? Like I see it as a net positive, but again, guidelines as to what would qualify, correct, but you don't want to go, you don't want to go like from one namespace to another namespace to another namespace. You're at a table with your name chair. I was also suggesting to someone that I talked to a few days ago that I would never want it to have a name of a facility, make it harder for people to find that facility. Does that make sense? Like I hate it when people tell, I did not raise sports kids, and so I hate it when people tell me like, oh, meet us at the such and such field and we're named after someone, and I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, can you give me a street address, right? So you just want to make sure that it's make things worse than anything. Christina. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I'm not.
I know what.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious about the parameters for like the part that's like names of donors or sponsors. Like there was talk about like the equity of like who's able to afford things. And like I would hate like for down the road, like if a corporation comes in, like donates a lot of money, right? Like the student walks down the hallway, do they feel like what's the feelings that they might feel if like Apple is like, I don't know, like sponsoring part of a wing? I don't know. So like, is there like what were the discussions around that?
Well, I think a couple things. One is we said, it's hugely unlikely that any commercial enterprise would donate a large amount of money to Mercer Island to have their name on something, because the brand value of that is pretty small. That said, there was some discussion around, if there was a band room and somebody wanted to, improve the acoustics and put all sorts of money into these things and that thing, then, maybe, but that's more likely to be a family or a group of families as opposed to a commercial enterprise. Where you've seen the most commercial enterprises investing is in stadiums. So I think in Kirkland, at Lake Washington High School, there's a Lee Johnson scoreboard there. So he bought them a new scoreboard, and he wants Lee Johnson Chevrolet to be across the top. So that's probably the place that you're more likely to have it. If you really wanted a new scoreboard and you get away with it for doing it for free, you call it Pagliacci scoreboard or whatever. But it's not renaming the stadium. It was renaming, it's just a signage on top of the scoreboard. So we've seen other examples. So University of Washington has Heck Edmondson Pavilion. And then they said, wow, we can sell rights to Alaska Airlines. So now it's Alaska Airlines Arena at Heck Edmondson Pavilion. I don't think that's going to happen here. Nobody in Alaska Airlines nor Pagliacci are going to want to sponsor
But you could restrict it to sports related spaces, like if you wanted to, in the policy, you could say like paid.
I think it becomes almost self
Yeah.
restricting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
let's see.
Oh, yeah, I just want to say, like, sort of agreeing with Maggie, like, for renaming, schools and wings and stuff. I think like renaming our wings of the school might not be kind of the best idea since they're like 100 wings, 400 classrooms are in there. I think that can make it more difficult for students. So like putting in the policy so that's clear to people that like maybe we're not renaming school buildings or doing a discussion about wings or different things like that, just to make it so students can navigate the school.
No, I think you're right. And you know, at the end of the this isn't a free for all to naming everything in the school district, because there's some things that just would be totally unnatural for the school district and unnatural for somebody who wanted to do naming. So, and the last two clauses of the policy allow you massive wiggle room to say, no, we're not going to rename wings of buildings.
So, mine was on the same lines as Ava. I am not convinced about the section of the corporation. So I know that the train thought, but how it's written is not that way. So it needs to be written. It brings a lot of ambiguity and maybe also with even more time period, say like if we're with Pagliacci, it will be 10 years like a rent. I don't know. But I think that it is a public school district. I think that not having any corporation will bring it as controversial depending on who is. So just not that happy with that section. So.
Before Dan and Jody speak again, I just want to draw your attention to the time. I know that we have a hard stop at 5. So can you, as part of your remarks, say whether you would like to go ahead with revising and considering this policy for adoption?
So yes, I would like to consider, revising and going forward with it. But there's a couple of things to make clear, like at least the committee's view, this is not European soccer jerseys. I think that probably like the majority of the naming would be in the form of plaques for rooms, something very tasteful. But I don't think limited to that, and that was the balance of not trying to be too prescriptive. And then also, as Frank said, with the 0 to individuals, perhaps a year. Over 25 years, that's 50 maximum. So it's trying to limit that. So there isn't a sense at all of walking in and it's Logo-Rama or there's like logos everywhere. That was not the intent. It was to be tasteful, much more in keeping with the community center. And one last thing is just a recognition that the people who participated in the committee, and I think the process itself, if we were to go forward, it really involves the community and people who aren't otherwise maybe as attuned to what's happening in the district. But then when they find out like, oh, like a teacher that taught me or my students is getting recognized, it's sort of an inroad to become involved with the school district again. So I think there's a lot of value in that.
Am I reading this exceptions clause or whatever, or duration review clause of the draft correctly, that we could go through the entire process, when someone nominate a name and maybe talk about it for 30 days, whatever, have a committee meet, and then in the end, the district could be like, actually, no, we don't want to name this thing. Like the entire process has been gone through with our policy, and then we would just be like, anyway, or
So the board does have the right to say, we don't accept the recommendations of the nominated committee for whatever reason. Yes.
And I would just like to say, I approve of going forward and revising and continuing this process. So
My suggestion well, so I haven't heard from you guys whether you are interested in moving forward with this.
I'm happy to go to the next step. I feel very strongly about there needing to be some parameters in terms of how recognition is. I appreciate that the committee discussed the plaque thing as kind of the norm. And I think that that could be added in without it being like, it can only be, but it can be like the expectation or the, I don't know the right wording, but I'm not comfortable with the naming policy that doesn't have that in some way. And then, yeah, that's my main issue with this. And I mean, the limitation thing is good, but I want to make sure that I mean, what's happened with the Pathfinders Award is there were a whole bunch of nominees in the beginning of it, and then it got, it was important at the time because it was something new. But then, you know, it was 3, 4, 5 people getting the Pathfinder Award every year, and now they're struggling to find people to give the award to. And I'm just worried that even 2 a year is, and I appreciate the expectation is 0 or 1, but I just think some way that it doesn't get diluted in the beginning, and that we don't end up with names everywhere because, you know, after 10 years, that's it. So those are my concerns. I think those could be addressed through policy. I totally support moving forward. I really would still like to hear more from well, I mean, if the parameters are what I personally am more comfortable with, I'm less concerned to call out the elephant in the room, to have someone's name sprawled on any surface, whether it's a gym or a wall and I mean sprawled like taking it over. I have huge reservations. Like even a name for me, and everyone's going to have their line that they're comfortable with, but even for me on like a scoreboard, you know, it's not giant. It doesn't overwhelm the room. It isn't going to be starting to be referred to as that person's gym. It's still the Mercer Island High School gym. I have less of an issue with that, or a plaque, or even a banner, and like an appropriate size banner. I want to see parameters, so that it's clear.
Christine, before we hear from you, I just wanted to respond really quickly to that and say, I would suggest actually considering maybe saying that the first 5 years of the policy, or the first 4 years of the policy, or something, there's a maximum of 1 recognition just while the system kind of gets up and running.
However, it can be done so it's not flooded and then I think diluted too. I mean, this should be something that's like legacy. Yeah. And even frankly for a plaque on a classroom, it should be legacy. Christina.
I feel everything that she said. I just would like to see a little more parameters to make sure that there are guardrails and.
My suggestion would be that if there were 2 board directors who wanted to work on making those changes, who are not me and not Dan, since we've already had a lot to do with this, that might make the most sense. Are you interested? No?
I think that was going to be my question is, you know, do you as a board or a subset, so I'm right with you, Director Tucker, want to go with that? Do you want to push this back to the committee or a subset of the committee? How do you want to proceed? So
no, I think the board kind of has given pretty good direction today on in terms of like what kinds of changes they would like to see made to it. I mean, I'm happy to just do it, or Dan, I can just do it. Why don't Dan and I do it? I would include in that though, I really like the concern that I appreciate the concern that our student reps brought up of like making the high school more difficult to navigate. I think one of the parameters should be that it doesn't make it harder for students to find their way around or visitors to find their way around our buildings. I don't know how to put that, but something.
There still needs to be a room number.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Not just a name. But the thing like, you know, go to the Joe Smith wing, right, is not like inclusive and welcoming for new students, you know.
I think fire code requires that.
Yeah.
So we're not telling the firemen, oh yeah, it's down there at the,
So then
That's right.
Dan and I will pick it up and make some of the changes and kind of kick around, and then we'll bring it back to some future meeting for a reading. Okay, Great, sounds good. Thank you so much.
I just want to thank Frank
And
again.
thank you again.
Yeah, and, you know, we had subsets of the committee. Dan and Frank worked on this in the background. There was a subcommittee, then we all met. But, you know, having someone who's not us at this table be able to kind of bring that forward, I think, gives great perspective.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We are going to start up again at 5, so should we recess for 10 minutes? Yes. Okay.
I want myself.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not seeing this, but. This is our annual linkage session with MIEA. And I would love to just start by going around the table and everyone's just doing a very quick intro of who they are and where they are if they're one of our schools. So I'm Maggie Tucker, and I am in my 5th year on the board, 6th year on the board, and I'm currently the president of the board.
President Superintendent.
Andrew Johnson, technology director.
Trustee Wilson, I teach 2nd grade down at Linkage, and then I'm also the executive representative there as well.
I'm Danielle Orr, the para at Northwood, and I'm the vice president at the union.
Grade lottery English teacher for 25 years at the high school and a rep there.
Sally Lozier, I'm the current MIEA president, Mercer Island Education Association. I'm also doing some learning support at Island Park Elementary. I've been teaching for longer than Craig.
Susan Hamp, I am executive board representative at Island Park. And I've been teaching probably longer than you. There we go. Okay, Max, it's to you.
I'm Max Harper. I am the school nurse at West Mercer, and I'm also a building rep with you again.
I'm Michelle Hazen. I'm a math teacher at Mercer Island High School and teaching as long as Creighton has. So.
I'm Alice Larkin. I teach 6th grade language arts and drama at Island Middle School.
Andy Hamp, I work classified at Island Park, been there since 2004.
Elizabeth Mountain Grace, 1st grade teacher at Northwood and the exec rep for Northwood.
I'm Lucy Dora, I'm the junior student board rep.
I'm Ava, I'm the senior student board rep.
I'm Deborah Lurie. It's my 8th and final year on the board.
Christina Martinez, my 2nd year.
Dan Glow's my 4th year on the board.
Jimmy Lee, it's my 2nd year on the board, and I'm vice president.
Matt, you want to, let's just run around the back since we're all either staff or so affiliated with the district.
Sure. Matt Sullivan, Executive Director of Finance and Operations.
Aaron Matters, executive director of compliance, legal affairs, and communications.
Ian Henry, communications and law coordinator.
Okay.
Keep going.
I'm Althea Olson. I am Jessica Olson's daughter.
Trina Sherman, I teach 2nd grade at Northwood.
Elizabeth Oval, special services teacher at Northwood.
Stephanie Boyer, a local youth board director, community member.
Michelle Mueller, Friends executive assistant. Rachel Matthews, food service director.
Sure. You know, first off, we're going to have lots of opportunity, but it's kind of like, you know, when someone announces their retirement and then they still have a little run, but we have to definitely publicly recognize you. This is kind of our first opportunity to recognize and congratulate you on your retirement, Susan. I know you didn't want to disclose, or Sally didn't want to disclose for you how many years it's been, but it's been an impact on this community for a long time. We're going to have lots of opportunities to express that, but just congratulations.
Thank you.
You bet. With that, this is a great opportunity. It brings our staff members together with our school board and our leaders in our staff on MIEA. And, you know, we've been on kind of a bit of a run here ever since kind of COVID and before, and had an opportunity to come together and reach a 3-year agreement in the last time around. And so for the first time in a while, we're not also, you know, preparing for bargaining. So this is an open conversation about where we are as a district. So appreciate you all being here, and turn it back over. Director Tucker.
Yeah, so we have 5 items here that we have listed as topics of interest, and I don't know if you guys have any additional items that you want to bring up on top of those.
I think what we have is going to embed into what you have.
Okay, great. So the first topic is implications of federal and state legislation and orders.
Actually, what I'd like to do is just start with an opening statement, which has been what I've been doing for a few years now. I first wanted to thank all of you for inviting us to be here. It's a very important function for us as a union here on Mercer Island. As executive board members, we represent over 450 MIEA certificated and classified members who work for the school district. We look forward to speaking with you about topics of common interest to our members. So we're not bringing just our own voices, but also the voices of all the members that are standing behind us. As many of you know, MIEA members are the majority of the employees in this district. We represent custodial staff, bus drivers, teachers, paraeducators, ESA specialists, including counselors, psychologists, occupational and physical therapists, nurses. We're honored to have one of you here. Our members are heavily invested in the success of this district, just as you are. And as such, we hope that the board and superintendent will continue to work with us to create a positive place to work and learn for all of us and for our students. Paramount to our success as educators and learners is our ability to work together in a system built on mutual respect, integrity, trust, and a common goal of providing the best possible environment for our students to learn and grow and employees to work. Our members are particularly interested in the current financial state of the district and how the board sees it in relation to last year. We have heard that the board would like to provide employees with competitive pay and working conditions that attract and retain educators, and also employ a more diverse workforce. We look forward to the conversation this evening. And that's where we're going to start with your first topic. Thank you for having us. Thank you. So Alice, I think you're the starter.
Yeah, so in our current political climate, there's a tremendous amount of concern around the ability of public education to thrive. So I have 3 questions that I just want to let you know. First, what is the school board doing to stay on top of both federal and state legislation and orders?
Pass that one to our superstar.
Just to set that up, we used to only have 1 legislative rep on the board, and the board changed that to 2. And so Director Lee and Director Martinez are both legislative reps because of the volume, and also being able to have someone who's on for 2 years and a first year, so we have more continuity. So just so you know that.
Actually, it's been a great system. I'm on it because we also changed the time of year that we switched ledge reps to the summer, because that way, in the past, the new ledge rep was taking over right before the session started, and it was just kind of drinking from a fire hose. So this is much better, a much better system. So Christina really is our powerhouse.
And if I could just add, before we let another talk for Christina, she has done such yeoman's work this year, like unprecedented level, more informed about legislation that impacts education both nationally and at the state level, and it's been astonishing the amount of like work and research that she's put into keeping us informed. So no pressure, but.
No. I will say that I'm trying to be on top of at least every day, but during the first portion of the legislature and the Washington State portion of it, I think every Wednesday at night is when they put the next week's agenda. So we're trying to see which ones are the ones that are most of interested, and if there's one that it's part of our legislation, the legislative priorities and the big 3, it's there's always advocacy, either written statement or chiming in. But I'm trying to keep them up to the board if there's something coming up. The same with the national level, although it's ending quick. I know that right now it's still before at the national level, 2 policies are the opposite. One is in favor of keeping the education department, and the other is opposing it. So it's a matter of just seeing what it looks like. The same, once I learned the state and the national level, I learned that we also have to learn about the courts. So there's other things that we are kind of talking, and we're keeping an eye on how things evolve at the circuit courts to see if it will have an impact for the different students related to especially the idea legislation. So that is something that it's I think it's like my soul water every night. I mean, and tonight I was into the videos. I was not able. I had meetings in the morning to today. There was few of the executive meetings at the legislature to see if the ways and means some of the three big bills that are in place go forward. So that will be my super over tonight. Look, and then tomorrow there's the House will have a few in the executive session. But once they're out of the appropriations and the ways and means, we'll know that we will have something in the floor, and then we will go. And I will say that Sally has been part of your organization has been part of this alliance that we have worked with the nearby districts. So I think it has been a great collaboration with other districts, not only school boards, but also education associations and also PTAs to make a collaborative effort and keep us on track on what is happening, because it is a lot. Yes.
Wow. Okay, thank
So-
you.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, my sense is certainly like everyone is sensitive to the barrage, flurry, whatever adjective one wants to say of legislation coming out of the, the federal executive branch. I think right now, the view is to sort of wait and see if there will be an impact. So far, I think in terms of the ground level, we haven't seen any in our district. Like if you hear differently, like certainly reach out to the board. But I haven't heard any. I think to keep an eye on is funding, right? So the federal funding to our state is 10.8%. To our district, it's 3.9%. So if funding starts to be tinkered with, then that will have an immediate impact. And it also, even though we're less reliant on federal funds, to the extent that the state decides to backstop any loss of federal funds, that will have a reallocated effect that could also perhaps particularly harm some districts. So I think sensitive to the funding, and for the other, paying attention, but I think it's important to continue to focus on what's within our control and what affects us and what sometimes can be a bit of white noise.
And adding that, can I add just one last thing? I think that with that also, if we end up seeing the federal or not, comes along, what is behind it, right? The policies and what is backing up. So I think we're also kind of making sure that we have in place the things that we value in our district, like every student is welcome, and ensuring that if something goes away in terms of policy, we also have things in place to ensure that every student has what it needs to succeed. So it's something that we're just observing how things go at national and state level, and also with OSPI also, I guess, that they are also seeing. I think it will all depend on what happens, but I'm always willing to hear your ideas too, because I think that this is an effort together. It is so much information coming back and forth, so I'm always happy to hear what you have to complete what I have.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
We've got one more reply.
Oh,
I just wanted to I think that the board's priorities are clear and have been clear, and I just want to reiterate them because I think it's useful to hear that, with under the direction of Fred and Matt as the experts in education and then finance, we really are balancing competitive pay, the fund balance, and i.e. financial health of the district, and then student programs and needs, and doing that in a responsible, steady way so that we're all aware that we're building back our fund balance from COVID, and then maintaining our competitive pay, or at least trying to achieve competitive pay, and doing that in the advocacy that we're focused on. And we each say the big three, but MSOC funding, special ed, and transportation are all huge buckets of money that we're paying out of our levy dollars, that we should be paying out of our levy dollars, that we want to be putting towards student programs or additional staff. And so it's really trying to take, and get the legislature to understand we need this money so we can actually pay our bills, so that we can fund our schools in the ways that we want to fund them. So that is a priority. It's been a priority, it continues to be. And I just want to thank you. I think on behalf of the board, we know the sacrifices that you make. We talk about it during the bargaining times when we're setting parameters. We know you take less. And because you understand the situations that we're in. But we want you to know that we always attempt to do our part, advocating with the legislature in terms of funding, supporting the bills that we know will put dollars in so that we can put dollars to actually where we want them to, rather than paying to keep the lights on, because those should be reimbursed fully by the state. So we hope that you feel like we have your back, and I at least feel like you have ours, because you guys really understand. We hear from other districts where they're having to renegotiate contracts because it was too high and they couldn't meet those. And we have not had that relationship, at least in the last several years. And it has, I've noticed, I think our community has noticed, and we're really appreciative of it, because, you know, it benefits us all. And as long as I have anything to say about it, as we have more, you know, it will go to the right places, is enough for me.
Thank you. You might have answered the next one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How are you working together with us and our key community members? I think that means like the city council, the PTA, to ensure Mercer Island School District will thrive over the next 4 years.
Over the next 4?
Yeah, well, and I think that's relative to, I think, more in connection with what's happening at the federal level.
And I think Christina kind of touched on it a little bit when you
yeah.
talked about, you know, the town hall piece.
Yeah.
I'd like to see how that's moving forward in your mind, how we can form a partnership that's similar to that, or continue that work, because I don't think we can lie down right now.
I'm going to answer that question in a little bit of a different way, which is in terms of like ensuring that our students' kind of rights and dignity are respected, as well as our staff, right? You know, that we're very fortunate to have, you know, a state government that is right now serving as kind of an umbrella to protect our children's rights, as far as like, you know, LGBTQ plus, you know, identifying kids, that they can be called by their own name and, you know, with the correct, you know, pronouns and so forth, you know, that's not true in every state, but for right now, you know, we are looking to that level of our government to kind of like protect to protect us from some of the kind of seemingly random edicts that are flying out of Washington right now. So,
I think that kind of leads into the last question. In addition, MIEA sent y'all the MIEA guidance on immigration issues with a sample resolution that hundreds of districts around the country and the King County School Board have considered and or adopted. Have you had a chance to review this, and what are your thoughts on adding MISD to the list of signers?
And we recognize that this was kind of sent to you at the last minute. It was a document that we've been waiting to receive, and received it over our midwinter break. So I do apologize for the last minute.
They're just receiving it too because of that. So
Okay.
we have not had a chance to review it.
yeah. I was just gonna say, I can't speak for the board because we haven't had a chance to discuss whether it's something that we would want to take on or not, but I will say that even though we haven't had, you know, ICE agents or ICE agents, people claiming to be ICE agents in this community yet, it has touched families in this community. Somebody that I know whose son is in college in DC, who graduated from Mercer Island High School 2 years ago, had his classes disrupted by a man coming in pretending to be an ICE agent, hassling, you know, other students who ended up being arrested. And it just like the fact that that's happened. So even though that's not happening to our Mercer Island, it is impacting our kids. Yeah.
So you have to go to the question about, you know, what we've done and what I sort of see as like the big items in terms of the next 4 years and partnerships. I think it'll continue to be regionalization. And recognizing that there's real cost of living differentials depending on where people live in the state. I think one of the things that is worrying is there's a constant push to reduce the regionalization rate, which I think is already inadequate to reflect the economic reality. So one of the things that I did when I came on the board is I drafted a resolution which the board unanimously adopted, but actually the city also then drafted their own about regionalization, which was adopted. I think it's perhaps the only time there's been resolutions adopted at both the city council level and the school district level. And 2 years ago, when David D'Souza was on the board, or maybe 2 years ago, and Fred had recently become superintendent. We spoke with Chris Reichdahl about the attempt at that time to reduce the regionalization rate and why it didn't really mesh with reality. And I think that's going to continue to be an issue. It's not something where the state organizations are necessarily in alignment with us. And I think it's a sort of every district for themselves, or districts can, get together and say, show that it affects the ability really to attract diverse workers and staff and to pay a living wage. And that these are issues that should be, I think, paramount. But sometimes I don't think they're really given full consideration to.
So I'm gonna add first to what you said, and then, I totally agree, and I think that why it's so important that this partnership, because I think that we are a mirror of what is happening around us and to the state. So the legislation does need to recognize that this formula is absolutely not working for anybody. So I think that this is why all this conversation needs to keep happening, and this partnership, not only between our small, like the one that we have, but maybe keep growing those partnerships to ensure that the voice gets even louder every time, because they need to make some changes. Related to this, I think that we have not talked about it, but definitely we'd love to have a lot more conversations. I have read and seen this. I think that for me it will be a big push from the district to ensure that parents not only know their rights, but mostly know how to do their emergency plan. So the emergency plan is in the case that in our district we have somebody that it is picked up by immigration. What will happen to that kid that is in the school? What is the responsibility of the school? So if nobody comes and pick them up and there's no emergency plan, we have to call child protective services or police, and that's when it is the back door of getting to those students. So how can we protect them and ensuring that each family, regardless of your immigration status, also has an emergency plan? Like that could happen in an earthquake, or it could be anyway, like in any circumstance, right? So, and we have a very large international community that it does matter to know exactly if the parents do not show up for whatever reason, what are you going to do with that child? Who are you going to call? Who is legally responsible? So I think that the conversation needs to happen. And this is.
And that's part of what this resolution is all about. So it is one of the important pieces. This is really trying to look out for the children that we all work with here in Mercer Island School District. And whether we have a whole lot of them or just one of them, we still need to have a plan in place, because it never works well to just wait for the disaster. So
yeah, and this I think that it needs to happen regardless. I think this is a very sad circumstance that we're talking because of this. But it should happen anyway, because so yes.
thank you for considering the document and for your time. It's going to take a little to read through. It's a long time. It's something we would love to partner with you on if you're interested.
I have a follow-up question. About the federal funding, you touched on a little bit. Also, thank you for all your comments. And so far the state superintendent Rexdale has said, ignore so far the messaging, but I was wondering if things changed later on and we felt the pressure of the threat of if we maintained the current curriculum we have, if we maintained our commitment to inclusion model that the state is moving toward, if we maintain that and we're in threat of losing our federal funding, where does the school board feel like, what do you feel like you would do in that situation?
I'm happy to say we haven't yet had to have that conversation, but it's certainly like in people's minds, where do you draw the line? Like where do you start to trade, the funding that is paying for, special education services for, it's going to be, if it comes, I hope it doesn't come to that. If it comes to that, it'll be a really difficult conversation to have at that time. But thank you for planting that seed. Yeah.
So I think one, it'll likely play out at higher education first for a number of reasons. So I think one, we haven't seen that yet at higher education. And I think that will be the canary in the coal mine, and we'll probably still have a bit of time before it goes down to K through 12, which is much more local control, much more diverse, harder targets, right? So my 2 cents is wait and see what happens at colleges and universities. And if we start seeing actually any movement there, then perhaps that's the time to divert a little bit more resources for a game plan. Otherwise, I think it's, focusing really on the issues that are germane to us. And right now, I think one of the biggest dangers is overreacting to an issue that might never materialize.
I just want to say, I would just point everyone back to our fundamentals and our priorities. And I think that we're really clear, and we basically have to become someone different than we are in order to make decisions that would change those things for the district. I agree. I don't want to say, the sky is falling in a lot of places. And I've kind of been saying lately, like, we are like calling fire in a crowded theater. It's that time. Local elections matter. City council elections matter. School board elections matter. Make sure you have the people sitting here who are going to maintain the fundamentals and priorities that you want.
I think the calculus will also be based on which federal funds, is it across the board, or is it Title I versus special education that they're using? Because in a district like ours, IDEA special education would be in most districts would be the most devastating. Title I, we're $100,000 is all we're receiving in the first place. And so we'd have some decisions that I'd bring to the board to say cost analysis on some of that, because we're fortunate and yet not fortunate. We're not fortunate because we don't get a lot of the money in the first place. We're fortunate because those are some things that won't get us, like our neighbors to the south in Tukwila, a very similar sized district, but tens of millions of dollars versus us.
And I will go back to this partnership that we're making here, the advocacy that we have built and the relationships that we did also in Washington. Is the advocacy doesn't go only for Marshall. Like, we were there talking to just sharing the stories about our neighbors too, because it will impact different. And I think that if there's a ripple effect, even if it doesn't have an effect directly right now, that if that happens to far away, or it has a ripple effect with the education of the state, and that state will have to redistribute a lot of things. But also, I think that every single chain of the challenge matters. So we are keeping our eyes open, our minds, and trying to kind of think ahead, and at the same time do not panic and resist a little bit. So I agree with Deborah. Like, this is who we are, and we're standing our ground right now. But we are also looking at every single I don't know what's coming. Yes, we are not blind in that sense. Like, we are really looking to what could it.
I do want to reach out and just say to Fred that earlier when this whole thing started to be chattered about, you put out a statement to all of our members that I really appreciated, and I know most of the members that I've talked to very much appreciated, with a little bit of guidance and direction as to what to do. And I just think it doesn't make sense at this point to stick our head in the sand and pretend like what's happening isn't happening. Panic is never the answer, but having a plan is. So my hope is that our school district will have a plan.
I will say, as someone who's embedded in higher education right now, that the feeling very much on campuses is that I'm familiar with, at least, is that everyone's in kind of a holding pattern right now, right? Like, hiring has been frozen at a lot of universities, funding has been frozen, like, don't apply for new grants right now. Everyone's just kind of waiting to see how all of this shakes out.
All right, my question is dealing with MIEA, MISD school board partnership that we've developed over the past several years. And recently, last month, we partnered at the Eastside Town Hall to call out the big three funding priorities. And you mentioned those earlier tonight. And to move possibly to a more progressive system of taxation in the state of Washington. The question is how can we best partner in a positive working relationship with you for the important purpose of increasing state funding for our school district. What more can we do?
I think what we struggle with is our legislators don't want to hear from Mercer Island whining about revenue. And we found that it has been the most productive to be joining forces with the communities around the state. And that when we can find, we have so much more common than we have that separates us. And that when we can communicate those stories that, we might need, higher cost of living adjustments because our cost of living is so high here for our staff. And then other communities need additional resources for services for their students because they're so limited and hard to get. So they need people, they need to pay more or whatever it is. That if we could partner and show like, here are the things that we need. Don't take away from us to give to them, but we have different needs. And so find a way to balance that and meet the local needs of the communities. That's the best advice I think I've gotten from our state legislators is build coalitions, whether it's, in our community, but also amongst communities so that, it's easy for them to brush off people who don't worry about having dinner on the table, which I get it. But it doesn't mean that we don't have needs too. And there's ways that we can support each other so that all of our needs can be met. Because revenue really is the issue. And there's not much of a point in talking about we need more funding. We need more revenue so that they can give the funding. And I think that comes down to local elections, continue to support the people that are going to be advocating for increase in revenue. And, that's when we're going to see more money.
I might invite your voices into this because you actually made headway into the Republican caucus when you went down there that we don't always have a chance to. So, I think students too, and their stories. So I don't know if you just want to give a quick overview of what you did as students.
Okay, yeah. I think the Friday before or Thursday before break, we gathered with like Deborah said, a coalition of students from various districts, and we were meant to represent students across the state. And we went down and talked to 6 or 7 legislators about the big 3. And it was some really good conversations. We did talk to some friendlies, right? People that are in support, letting us know more about what they think is going to happen. And then we also talked to a few legislators that are even have completely different views on this issue, not necessarily fully in support of adding more funding, right? And those were some really interesting conversations, and it was really valuable to partner with a bunch of different students because we all had different stories, different experiences in each of our districts that we could bring together. So that's something definitely really important.
Yeah, I would say it was very productive talking to people who are not exactly in favor because it's not, at least being students, at least it felt like they actually did listen to us, and actually, even though it's not an easy conversation, that can be a place where we can find a lot of productivity and difference. Because talking to a lot of friendly people, we don't really get a lot of change, but that felt like a place where we can really actually make it happen.
And in terms of what MIEA can do, I think similar, more days down at the hill or collaboration with other unions is really important. And then because you guys are also the ones that have the first-hand experience, and bringing those actual stories really does work. So
Yeah, and that is something we do through our Minister of Council. And we are a small local in a much larger union, which is Washington Education Association. And then above us is the National Education Association. So we're actually involved at both of those levels, national and state, pretty strongly.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, Cleary is a double-edged sword, right? Overall, it raised revenue for public education, but we also lost control. So to some extent, we lost voice, right? When there was more autonomy for local school districts to set their own enrichment levies, then the voters, the staff could come to the board and say, we need more, put on a levy. we've lost that ability. So it's just a recognition. And of course, the state constitution, the way it's been interpreted with paramount duty, that is the result. But we live in a state where it's the third highest funding comes from the state compared to other states in the country. Only Alaska and Vermont receive more from the state as a percentage of their overall local funding. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword. But I think the flip side, rather than joining groups, could be asking for more autonomy at the local level. Is another approach. It hasn't been pursued much, but I mean, you can get to the same end.
I was just gonna ask, are the students gonna get together and do a coalition like that again, or is that a one-time thing because that sounds like it was really powerful and exciting for you to talk to other people.
Yeah, I think we're hoping so. There's a lot of different student rep groups that we can get together and talk through. And I think we're hoping probably sometime in the future to get down and talk to legislators again.
Yeah, and definitely sending up like follow-up emails and like letters as well, because those are like also very important in addition to like going in person. Yeah.
Thank you.
So can I just add to what you can do is when we were with staff of Congressman Smith in Washington, one of the things that they said is that the stories matter. And so sharing your stories, but also in a way that they can land something really concrete. So getting together some of the stories, students, teachers, or school district, and putting it in a way that for them it makes a lot more sense to say like, oh, this is how it looks. And if we stop Adam to Title I, for example, this is how it will look here, or how it so having those stories matter. And I think that is the same in Washington in the state level. So the stories matter. How does this impact students and how does it impact teachers and the reality check for them instead of just numbers from us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the conversation and I really appreciated hearing from you because I was super curious about how Thursday went because we were talking about snow at that point and whether you were going to be able to go. So I'm glad you went and I'm glad it went well. That's fabulous. And I'm also super impressed that you're down there doing it.
Okay, I have a question about competitive pay. It's going to be from a nursing standpoint. As a nurse, I can easily go find a job that makes about $30,000 to $40,000 more per year. To be clear, I'm not expecting to make as much as a more clinical nursing role. However, other districts in our area pay nurses about $3 to $5 more per hour, and I know that other districts also pay teachers in ESP roles more. With that being said, we are interested to hear your thoughts around whether you believe MISD is providing competitive pay to all your educators in the current economy, and how do you see this affecting the education that our students receive?
Yeah, I do think that we're competitive. When I look at that question, I look at OSPI's personnel report, in particular, the various tables, including table 19, which is particular for certificate staff, and then how it compares, and then there's other tables as well for the various occupations. I look at NEA, the school survey, the state survey, to see where Washington State comes out on that, which is, I believe, the third highest in the country now. And I recognize that there's differences within categorizations, within seniority rank, within areas, but the state level. And I look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics information, which last came out in May of 2023, that will be updated in May of 2025. And I think on those parameters, I do see competitive.
So are you talking about countrywide or statewide?
So I think within the state, again, going back to McCleary, we're hamstrung to an extent with regionalization, and I've certainly done my part to vocally make sure that we retain the regionalization rate we have and that it's not reduced. Nationally, in terms of how our state is, I think is competitive. And then within the state, when one looks at the OSPI information, yeah, we're competitive with Issaquah, Lake Washington, and by being competitive, you have to look at, depends on what column you're looking at, and we can have that conversation. I'm happy to. I recognize that certain districts, I think it's in part it's because of the experience factors, like Anacortes, Everett, Mukilteo, Edmonds, Arlington, and Marysville are the very top That's a variety of reasons regarding the experience factor as well as additional federal funds that they get. But yeah, I printed it out like in advance of the meeting. I'm happy to go over it and to sort of discuss comparisons at any time.
I just want to say you've made a couple references to McCleary, and I want you to know from me, McCleary was the first pay raise I had in 10 years. I went going backwards for 10 years because my insurance went up and my pay stayed the same. So there are negatives to McCleary, but for those of us with our feet on the ground, McCleary was a blessing.
And it wasn't a pay raise. It was supposed to keep us, keep up with inflation. So inflation was going up and our pay is staying the same. So we were continually falling behind. And so finally that came and we could make up for some of that.
So I would hope that when you make those statements to a room full of classified and certificated educators, that you realize the impact McCleary had for us.
No,
It was massive.
and I would be the first to acknowledge that McCleary shifted the ground significantly. I think the question is whether it was useful and good 8 years ago, and whether that same model necessarily has now become a liability or maybe an asset, but it's changed.
I couldn't have stayed in teaching.
I understood,
The
but
direction we
it's,
were headed, there was no way I could afford to.
We're not-
come here and stay in teaching.
I would argue there's no more 25% increases like we got after McCleary, because that would shoot Washington State
Because the
past
state didn't pay us.
any state in the country.
Can I recognize first Deborah?
Thank you.
As a fellow government employee, I have tremendous empathy. I feel the same way. I took a huge pay cut to go, frankly, from county to state, and we don't have any sort of system where I make more money. So when I came in 3 years ago to the state, I'm making the same salary I am, and what's our inflation? What, 15%, 20% in the last couple of years? We don't do a good job. It all comes down to revenue. And I think that everyone, especially people with masters and doctorates, deserve to be making a living wage. We're not doing it. We need to keep working at it. And, you know, McCleary was a good step in the right direction. Was it like the right, I mean,
Did it do all the things?
are there negatives
Right.
with it also? Yes, but it's got us to be able to pay our teachers, at least our certificated staff, in line with government wages for professionals.
But I have to say, I have to be proud of the fact that at the bargaining table, we also brought up our classified staff.
Oh, no, absolutely. And when I say, and I'm pointing out certificated, because I wouldn't say that classified makes a living wage.
Correct.
That's why I point out certificated, is because it's not a living wage. Everyone deserves to make a living wage. And I think that you have a community that supports, well, for the most part, supports that. And that it's unfortunately making choices, and by choosing to be a nurse in a public school district rather than at a private hospital where we know what nurses are making, as they should be, you know, it's making choices and we all do it. Does it mean that you shouldn't be able to have a home and support your family? That's crazy. So I am here to say that my priority is living wages. We know it all comes back to students for me. We know the biggest impact for our students is their teachers in the classroom. And so if we don't maintain that, we're doing a disservice to our students. So no, we have a lot of work to do. McCleary was a start in catching up, but to me, that's just catching up, and our legislature needs to find resources and revenue streams so that we can continue to, you know, it's really easy to say in corporate America, they don't have the, you know, the increased pay like teachers do on the scales. Well, look at what the salaries are and then look at the other benefits they're getting, you know, so I understand what you're saying. I couldn't agree with you more, and that's the voice you're going to hear from me.
I was going to say something similar to that. I think that pretty much is my biggest asset are my kids. And I love that we have the staff that we have, and I do believe that they do deserve a living wage. I also believe that I appreciate the education that you have and bring behind you to educate my kids. And I also recognize that I will keep advocating to make this, if there's a 2.0, to make it that it will be what it needs to be for everybody that is involved in education for the children. Because your mental health, your economic stability matters to our students. I also recognize that maybe compared to other districts, we might seem competitive. However, I also understand how that doesn't look the reality of inflation, of how things cost and everything else, and how far you have to travel, etc. There's so many variants there. So I would echo a lot of what Deborah said, that the advocacy will be there every time that I can to ensure that.
Can I hop in real quick just before, because we're talking about competitive pay and I've heard it spoken about at the board before, and I'm glad that you're doing your homework and looking at nationally, we are competitive. Sure, Washington State is the highest. And even when we're looking at Washington State, we live in a region that is making a very good wage. But when we are talking about competitive pay, we are talking about within a commuting area. We're not trying to bring people over. The children in my house, we have family that lives over in Wenatchee. And me and my husband are like, boy, if we made what we made here, we lived in Wenatchee, we'd be great. But that's not where we live. I make a commute down from Edmonds, which is one of the highest paid districts in the area. I enjoy working for Mercer Island. I'm highly committed, but we are by no means competitive to Edmonds. We're by no means competitive to Lake Washington. We're by no means competitive to Bellevue or to Issaquah. All the way down that 405 where you have people commuting, we are not competitive with them. So when we're talking about competitive pay, we're talking about retention of staff and how are we going to get people to continue traveling down and up the freeways to come work for this really amazing district, for these really amazing families and students. And how do you keep people here too? So that's what we're talking about with competitive pay.
Just before I recognize Fred, I just wanted to chime in to say that one of the things that we have, that our legislators have advocated for, and I know our state reps have advocated for a number of years now, is updating the kind of prototypical school model, right?
Sure.
Which right now is allocated for like something like a third of a nurse at each school or something like that, right? Like some, that would
I
help.
wish it was that high.
Or whatever. Like 6% by yourself in the 6 months, you know. So that's something that we certainly continue to support and continue to advocate for. Also, I want to say I am the daughter of a single mom who was a school nurse. I do appreciate the choices that you face in looking at the marketplace and looking at, you know, the options that you have.
Can I ask a time question?
Yes.
Are we here till 6?
6 o'clock.
Okay. So if possible, it would be great if we could move to our next question because we could go on about this question for sure. So I would love to.
Can I give Fred like 30 seconds?
I said it this morning to the Island Park group and those tuning in from Northwood, you know, I remember those days of the buttons at the bargaining table, the 0.000, that's a reminder of all the years when the state was not providing any COLA. And what is weird now, and I never drew the same comparison, is with that levy cap, we're now at that same thing where $12 million just keeps getting less and less in terms of its buying power, and yet inflation is going up. And so where we were there with individuals and salaries there, now coming out of McCleary, now it's at a systems level, and that is a hard shift, and I think that's coming about.
Yeah. Well, I think this one's getting to be about money. Funding, the school bond proposition number 1 is in MIEA's estimation an essential step in creating and maintaining effective learning environments to enhance the experiences for all of our MISD employees and students. What steps is the school board or the school board members taking to ensure that a united front is being built, forged, and this is a continuation of partnership question between MIEA, MISD, PTA Council, and the Mercer Island City Council, and of course the wider community.
Well, I'll say that just as the chair currently of this board, I'm doing my best to ensure like open discussion on the board and kind of maximize and improve kind of board harmony, because I know that that is important for people in the community. And I think that if they look at us kind of like eating ourselves, they are like, oh no, do we want to trust these people with this, this district with this kind of money? So that's my kind of home front that I'm able to take action on, and then we're limited in some respects as far as like what we're able to do as board members in advocating for the bond. But we can take our board hat off and be private citizens, saying, I personally as a private citizen.
Yeah, and I think the board recognized that it was, that the proposal before us was reasonable, to put the voters, to the public for a vote, and voted unanimously to do so. And I think that unanimity in putting to the voters, and then trusting that voters will vote on facts, is important. I think that there can be sometimes too much of a desire for everyone speaking in a unified voice. And I think that comes across as disingenuous and is not a robust conversation on the merits. So I would encourage, everyone to to discuss the bond. It's the reason it's been put before voters to vote on and to consider. And I think we did the job by taking the time to have a fleshed out proposal that goes into some detail of what the projects are. And then it's up for voters to decide in a couple of months.
And let's make sure that facts are facts and lies are lies.
I will add that the district has a lot of information and they have been very, very great with the presentations, and if somebody has questions, they can provide a lot of the factual information and we can support. And I don't know if you have been also a part of the bond.
I guess just like, I think making sure that people, like a lot of like knowing about the facts and like how it's directly going to impact students and like staff and people that are using the buildings, and like using the facts and the truth to like kind of like, show the need through that.
I mean, it's where you all work every day, so you know far better than we do. Well, not us too, but about the needs and how teaching has changed and the needs for different spaces, and advocate for our kids. Thank you for.
I think you kind of got into the next
You started
question.
getting into the second part of the question, which is additionally, our members are hearing a few individuals who are presenting inaccurate and misleading information in regard to the bond proposition on social media sites like Nextdoor or Facebook. So as a school board, how are the harmful effects from that being dealt with? Is there an impact to the board, educators, and the students?
There's a huge impact to the board. I mean, to students. It takes up so much time for the board to deal with it, and frankly, our time, it falls on Fred. And he has been overwhelmed into a point that I've never seen him overwhelmed. He manages it great in the last month or two because of the misinformation that's flying around. And, as much as we can say, those groups don't trust what we say because we're a part of the problem, right? So there are community members that are fighting back. We need staff who are parents and community members respect, who are in there doing the work to call out the lies. Call it lies. Don't call it alternative facts or even misinformation. There was lying. And I'm not talking about opinion. I'm talking about facts that are very clear and that are laid out in the bond. It's all a distraction to, frankly, it's all this is not a conspiracy theory. It's a distraction to tank the bond so that they can take over the school board, so that they can fire Fred. That's the goal. And if our community if that's what our community wants, fine, sit back and let it happen. If you don't want it to happen, now's the time to act.
And so where would you suggest that our members go to find accurate information about the bond and the work that the district has put into making it?
It's all on the website. All the factual information's on the website. I know you can reach out.
So we have we put some factual information regarding cap tech levies and all of that but we'll have a bond mailer that will come out. We can, by the PDC regulations, you can do one. We have the full website up with all of the bond information. If you'd like to follow me down at 6:30 tonight to Island Park, I'll be giving a bond presentation that the PTAs are putting on. So I've been invited by a number of groups to come give an update. Happy to come to your exec council to give the same. I think we're in a tricky spot because as Director or President Tucker said, you know, in my role, as long as I have this badge on or this badge on, all I can do is present facts. I'm not in a place where I get to be where I am in Issaquah, where I get to be pro or con. I have to just be neutral. And so does the board, as they said, when their hats are on as board members. And so, you know, that part of, you know, where you see something, you're like, well, that is an interesting way to present that information. I have a different way to present the information, but we just have to be right down the middle. And so it is a tricky spot, but it's also about the integrity of the election and making sure that what we're providing is the very best information for people to make a good choice.
I will say that there's something that just was brought to my attention within the last couple of days, that a friend of mine who had kids graduate from our system recently, like within the last 3 years, did not know that there was a bond even being discussed until the signs came up, and then was like, oh, I didn't know anything about that, right? And it makes me realize how we're kind of in a little bit of a bubble. Like we think everybody knows all the stuff that's going on. And once your kids are not in the system anymore, if you've never had kids in the system, right? Like you don't necessarily know kind of the background to it. And so I encourage you to just go on the website and read about it. But I think that the 1 hour presentations that were done here by Malum and the other firm about the vision of what would be at the high school, the vision of what, you know, the changes being made in the design of the middle school. For me, those videos were very inspiring, like, and very kind of like, oh, I can see it now. Like I can see why you would do it like this. And it's safer for the kids. There's more collaborative spaces. Like there's more space for the arts. Like there's so many good things about what's proposed. And so for me, if there was somebody who you wanted to reach with just more information about the board, I would say, look for those videos, which are on the website, you know, and encourage them to spend the time watching. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't follow social media much, but I think, you know, facts are facts. And so, I mean, the bond is literally pretty concrete if you're putting up buildings. So I would just focus on that. I have not heard that this bond is about the overthrow of the board and the installation of, you know, MAGA people. I'm not sure what Deborah may be implying there. But it's about a bond. And it's about buildings. And those are factual questions and answers, and it's a discussion that, you know, should be had by the community, I think, without gaslighting, hopefully.
Will that meeting be recorded tonight?
It is being filmed tonight. Ian's not here, but yes, that one is going to be, that will be the one that will be. And then the presentation has not been put up on the web yet, but it will be. Tonight's is kind of the all factual one. We'll have that one as well, so people can just see what that looks like. And we have lots of handouts that every time we've been out of school, we've left them behind. So I've been seeing, I think in your school, they're right on the front thing around, you know, and it also covers like the pool, because it's not, you know, there's work being done in other areas too.
I just want to say one more thing about the bond, which is like, I hope that people can separate in their minds sort of the current board from the bond, because this bond is for our kids, and it's for our staff, and it's for our district, and it's for the community, and it's something that is going to go on. I mean, look at how long we've been nursing along the last set of buildings, right? Like, I mean, this is something for 50 years from now, for 75 years from now. And so I hope that if they have issues with, you know, individuals on the board or whatever, the board's functional level, that they can keep separate in their mind what they're being asked on the ballot is, do you want our kids to have these buildings, you know, going forward or not?
Yeah, and it's also us as the employees that are working in the buildings. Like we live in those buildings for most of our time, and it's time.
Well,
It
safety
really is.
matters, and
Yeah.
you know that you're the ones in between danger and our kids, and that should have a lot of say about how safe your work environment is.
Well, I want to respect your time and my team's time. So on behalf of all of us, we really appreciate your time. Thank you for it. and for the conversation. And I hope that we can continue the conversation maybe individually, because this format, of course, is a little odd and makes conversation difficult, but I appreciate all the answers and input that you've had. It helps us come back to our members with not necessarily what they might see in a school board meeting, but rather, hey, we had a conversation, we got answers to things that matter to you. So anybody else want to add anything?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy retirement.
So I did learn something. I learned that this,
Yeah. I was like, what's going on? Same chat.